Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the morning keynote of Day 2, the last day of the Homeschool Plus conference. Leslie Barson is here. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you.
Leslie is the mother of 2 grown children who have never been to school. She is one of the founders in 1993 of the Otherwise Club, and she continues to be involved. The club is a community center for home educators in central London. She has also published widely in the UK and internationally and speaks regularly about home education. Thanks to our conference supporters, Homeschool Life, G3, and Home Education Magazine, especially for their promotion of the conference, and thanks to Blackboard Collaborate for being such a good, stable platform around the world. Don't miss our Alternative Education Film Festival, 7 films showing this month, altedfilmfest.com. We've had 2 directors interviews so far, 5 more to go. We're having a lot of fun. Hope you'll join us for that. For those of you who are participating live, to the left of the map you will see some icons. You're looking for the second one down, the star icon. Click on it twice and then click on the map. Some of you have gotten tricky and know how to use the finger pointer now. This is a nice international crowd. Helps that our speaker is from the UK.
Managed to put my star on the map.
Nice. Feel free to make a note in the chat, time, temperature, and the like. And please do use that chat for questions or for comments. And Leslie, I'll be here to help you if you get to a place where you'd like to have us review those or interact with the audience.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me. My plan for the workshop or the presentation was to speak for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then leave lots of time for questions and discussion. I'm a bit new to all the technology, so you have to forgive me if I'm slow. So this talk is about the Otherwise Club, which will be 22 years old in February. I called it an invitational discovery community for this talk, although normally I call it an invitational learning community, and I'll talk about why I've changed that word in a little while. I feel often there's a limit to what you can learn from a community's history, because each group is very different. It's formed for different reasons, the different people in it are different, circumstances are different. But given that we've been going so long, I think there is, and we've got a particular ethos, I think that's the most important thing. There are several things that we can pull out of it that might help other people when thinking about running their groups or thinking about home education in general. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the Otherwise Club. It started really in my house when my son was 6, in about 1989. We were home educating, and I felt there was lots of chances for him to socialize with other home educating kids and school kids, but there wasn't a lot of times where they could work together. And I feel when people work together, they have a different social relationship. It didn't matter what they did. I didn't necessarily want them to learn anything particular, like maths or science or whatever. It was just that there was to be a project which people would focus on, and it would build towards something and have a finish time. So that happened in my house for about 3.5 years, and we met one day a week with all-aged people from about 5 to about 12 years old. We did the sort of things that most people do. We did the ancient Greeks, we did Japan, we did, just stuff that we were all interested in. I had to be interested too. It was very activity-oriented rather than academic. And gradually, after 3.5 years, those kids got big, and I wanted my house back, and they ate a lot and things like that. So we were looking for a place to move to, a sort of community place where it wasn't anybody's home. And a local community centre. I went in there and I said, we've got about 20 families and they'd all pay £100 a year, which they just made up. Can we rent the place for 2 days a week for £2,000? And to my surprise, they said yes. So we moved what was called the history group, which was this project group there, for 1 day of the week. And another day was a big, just an open day where families just came and things happened. So that was in February '93. Now, what's happened there has changed over the years, but some of the things that I can tell you are the sort of things that you might have at a school, you know, police dog handlers or people doing Shakespeare or bike repair, you know, all that, the sort of activity things. There are lots of things that we can do as a group that is much cheaper, for example, theater trips or workshops at museums, or in recent years we've, especially with our older ones, started to go away to Europe. We're going away on Sundays for 10 days to a European exchange with 8 different nations, meeting in northern Germany, and we're representing the UK, which I find quite funny. They're not all home educated at all, we're the only ones. So when you get people together, things happen, and somebody says, I'm a weaver, so we start weaving, or somebody was a cake baker, a cake decorator, and they start doing cake decorating, and other people come over and say, what are you doing? So there's, it provides a regular meeting place with, also somebody makes lunch on a rota. We have an alternative education library, we have equipment and craft equipment that people can borrow or they can use there, mostly for spontaneous activities. But there are regular workshops too, and I'll tell you how those are chosen. Okay. So, the title of this article describes the Otherwise Club as Invitational Discovery Community. So I just want to check that I've got that correct. I can't remember what I put. Yeah, Discovery Community. Okay, so I want to explain this first of all. The invitational part is not in the sense that you need to be invited to go there. The invitational is that there's no compulsion to go or even to become a member. Once you are a member, you don't have to join any of the activities, or you don't have to do anything that the club offers. You can just hang around. You can do nothing at all. And in fact, doing nothing is very fruitful. It's restful, and it confers dignity, it removes pressure, and it allows people to think for themselves. So doing nothing, I think, is very important. And it's often difficult for people of any age to do nothing, particularly in our society when we've been trained that we have to be productive, we have to be educational at every moment of our lives, rather than sitting and being who we are and being self-determining, finding out what we want to do and doing that. So the joy of simply living and being with friends without any defined activity is very difficult for us to do. So the club sees not doing as important as doing, and it's implied in the principle of self-determination, which is very important. So the process of initiating a new activity in the club begins when a member places a note on the wall, and it suggests the activity and the time and the date and the cost. And anyone can sign up for that activity. It's rather interest rather than age. So in this way, it's invitational. What happens there is invitational. You don't have to sign up if you don't want to. Let's see how it goes. So the part of what I've called discovery rather than learning, reading Holt again, which I haven't done for a while, and finding this from him, is that learning tends to be associated with things that are worthy and difficult and good for you, but not fun and enjoyable and self-determined. So it has connotations of being done to. Whereas discovery is learning, is open and joyful and active as a word. So that's what I would like to see, what we normally call learning as. So by calling it discovery, I hope I'm emphasizing that part of it. So in a way, you don't have to mention it because the club assumes that it takes place all the time. Some people think that you can direct what people discover or learn by sitting them down and putting a textbook in front of them. but often that misfires in the sense that they don't actually take in what you're hoping they will in terms of the subject, but they take in that they're really bored, or they really hate them being there, or they wish they had spaghetti for dinner, or whatever, or they're dreaming about their computer game or something. They're very difficult to actually dictate what somebody takes in any given moment. So if we replace the sort of more passive learning idea with a more active discovery idea, it's very important that for the club that we recognize that this is continuous and learner driven. It's driven by the person themselves. Sorry, I'm just catching myself up. It takes place all the time, and not just when attending something that's learning or educational. And it's important to have it in the title, I think, if only to raise the issue. And finally, the word community highlights the most important part of the club's purpose. The club operates through working, playing, and being together, through lived practice in the community. We get to know each other, young and old. We share the problems and the projects. We experience good and bad times. We argue. We get over arguments. We see each other's young people grow up. We support each other as our roles change. And we learn tolerance, hopefully, and patience between all of us, young and old. And this is the cornerstone that's needed to put all the other principles into action. The importance of the nature of the club is increased by the marginal nature of home education. So often people come in a high emotional state to the club at the beginning. They've had some terrible problem at school, or and they feel defensive and raw. And when they see like-minded people or people who are sympathetic, their defenses are let down, and often they bond much more quickly with the other people in the club. The assumptions often are made about the possibilities of mutual aid and common experiences, and these aren't always correct, but there's enough that keeps the community together, and many feel quickly at home. And the bonds are also strengthened by the invitational nature of the club, allowing each member to choose not to come, or not to come at a certain time for any reason. So to some extent, those who come are self-selecting and have a stake in making the club a place where they want to be. And this in turn drives forward their commitment to the community. So these three aspects, invitational, discovery, and community, are vital components of the club and give rise to three guiding principles of the organization, which validate the self-determination, the continual discovery, and the community. The most important is that each member is responsible for themselves and their discovery in the setting. So what they choose to do is up to them. It extends to all the activities instigated by the club. It's never a case of, right, we're all doing this, you must come and join. There is an organizer, but it's up to the members of the community to propose what they want to see happen there and to make it happen. Now, this is very difficult to maintain in a world where people are given very little responsibility for themselves and where they tend to look to others to tell them what to do or blame others rather than take responsibility. But it's also an empowering position and acts as an incentive to further autonomous relationships. Another shared principle is that the under 18s are more equal than the over 18s. This is partly to do with their literal size and also helps to mitigate in a very small way the fact that under 18s are treated so unequally in the rest of society. So at the club they are heard, valued, and respected. And the last shared principle is a new definition of success. Success is not defined in terms of exams or wealth or individual happiness, but is derived from living according to the guiding principles of the club. And hopefully this will result in a self-confident sense of self and a flexible and negotiated relationships with others. Putting these into practice is very difficult. We have so much pressure from outside. Part of this is achieved through the decision-making structures of the club. which involves participatory democracy of all the members, whatever age, enabling self-determination on both the collective as well as the individual level. This is implemented through constant talking, listening, and responding to what's being said. And it also involves recognizing that things can change from moment to moment, depending on factors like age, moods, weather, and how many and what mixture of people are at the club that day. And moods and weather might sound trivial, but in a weekly group of this size, they're very important. For example, there's an overall year-long mood that changes with the seasons. So attendance of members is usually highest from November through to March, with the most restless meetings and possibly aggressive behaviors usually at the end of March. And this might be due to large numbers of members having been cooped up all year together in the winter. I usually go and clean the store cupboard in March because I stay away from where everybody is. Everyone's at each other's throat. After March, people begin to look to various summer activities and they pick their heads up and they feel bright and cheerful again. So the participatory democracy decision-making is through consensus. The club has no formal meetings, but there is, even though this might seem contradictory, over the years we've found that meetings are not a good way of problem solving, as some people are too shy to speak in front of others or don't have an opinion and are bored about the issues raised. It's possible for some members to dominate meetings and thereby make other people feel unheard. The people under 18 rarely come to meetings, even though if they're encouraged to by those over 18, because they know how boring and time-wasting they are. So instead, the club has a sort of formal delegations of adults, of everyone actually, that emerge when there's a problem. And I call it gossip. We run by gossip. And I mean a particular kind of gossip, a very nice kind. So these groups shift and change as people talk about the problem. The ideas are discussed around the club in small informal groups until a consensus is reached regarding a solution, or there's a shift in attitude which makes the original problem melt away. Sorry, I'm just reading. I think I'm going to leave the comments till the end, and then I'll go back and quickly try and read and run through your questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely, and I can help you with that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Steve. So the problems are solved by this, what I call gossip, these sort of informal groups like an amoeba that come together and then dissipate into different groups, and people talk about solutions, and then solution will go around and the people will say, no, we don't agree with that solution, and then some people will say, yes, it's okay. And all this takes time and thought, and gradually, and usually the problem will dissipate by itself. But if a solution, if some activity is needed, it rises to the surface, and you'll hear that a lot of different people are referring to that solution, and that's usually the one then that should be implemented. The club also has what I call a benevolent dictator, which might appear contradictory to the principle of democracy and consensus decision-making, but is actually only there to safeguard this vision of the club and to safeguard these processes, to maintain the participatory democracy and consensus, because these are so fragile and delicate in our world that it takes someone who has articulated these aspects to take care of them. Also, to help the club to remain true to these principles. And it also provides continuity over the years as families come and go. It's important that these principles are not explicitly articulated so that newcomers discover them for themselves. This is part of the process of taking responsibility for yourself. The principles are tacitly accepted when you join the club, and sometimes it takes a long time for people to realize what they are. And some members never become conscious of them, even though they practice them and put them in practice. Other members are articulate about them, but have difficulty actually putting them into practice. So with reference to the discovery in the title, there's no mention in my analysis of the club of education. Discovery here is taken to be integral and continuous aspect of human life, whereas education has become a constructed, specialized activity which can be given and taken away. It functions as an economic category, which is given a value and sold to the individual in the form of an expert or a paid professional that the individual thinks necessary in order to learn. The club is trying to redress this situation by not specifically setting itself up as an educational institution. There is an exception to this, and that is when we're applying for grants or money or some activity from outside in the mainstream. We do consider ourselves as that, and we are actually registered as an educational charity. The size of the club is vital. There's no optimum number of how big or small because it depends on the people who are there, how well they know each other, and thereby how well they're able to build a community. Also by the amount of people who are there suffering. So if you have a lot of people, new people who've come with tremendous problems from school or their past situation and are very emotional and feel the need to repeat many times what's happened to them and to go over and over it, which most people do. We all do that when something terrible has happened. It becomes very difficult for what I call the old-timers to support these people because it's emotionally draining. And in fact, we do have a kind of unstated rule of passing people around so that we can all listen at different times to the same story and that no one person gets too drained by it. But these people require so much time and effort that often the activities of the club or the emotion or the social dynamics of the club take a back seat, and then the old timers get fed up and they don't want to go there because they don't want to just sit and listen to new people and so on. So it can really change the balance, and particularly if someone is very upset. For example, a young chap we had in who tried to commit suicide at 8 years old, and when he realized he wouldn't come into the building for weeks, he was screaming outside at the school, I don't want to go. But eventually his mum brought him every week, and the kids went outside to meet him, and eventually he did come in. And when he realized what we were, he became outrageous in his behavior, including setting fire to the loos and putting drawing pins under people when they sat down. And he was so acting out all his rage and frustration from his previous experiences on us, it was very difficult for us to handle, and we did have to put some boundaries around his behaviors, and that's fine. He also brought a real chainsaw to a Halloween party and started it off, and oh my goodness me. Anyway, so memories. He's a great guy. He's now grown and has come back and taught karate with us. But so the numbers are very important, and the type of numbers you have, but also even in terms of actual numbers of people, it needs to be a size that is small enough so that people can get to know each other. And so that if my child comes up and hits your child, you say, oh, that's okay because he's having a bad day, rather than, oh my God, I'm not going back there. That child hit my child. If you know the person, they're having a bad day, you're much more forgiving, and you can talk to them and they can talk to you and say, oh yeah, that's not right. I shouldn't have done that, and I'm really sorry. Whereas if the club is too small, it's not big enough to have a variety of relationships, and for frequent and intimate interactions are too frequent, then it's too much pressure on the people there. So all this structure that I've sketched is very, very fragile and changeable and continually bombarded, both externally by the pressures from mainstream society of exams or grades in music we have here, or swimming badges, or so-and-so's little friend who goes to school is doing this and we're not doing this. And so parents are constantly undermined. But it's also bombarded by internal pressures from us. We all went to school, we've all internalized the system, and constantly people are saying, the cry is, what about maths? So every sort of 6 weeks, or well, maybe a bit more than that, people are, become worried about their child not being up to speed and not learning what they need to, and that they're ruining them for the rest of their life, all those things I'm sure you guys know all about as well. So, and often that changes too with a child's age. So a parent who's been very child-led or learner-led or discovery-led for many years and has a thriving, healthy young person, and even though they might need regular reassurance through their childhood, they're still enjoying a time of everyone being together and learning together, doing stuff together, discovering stuff together. But when a person reaches a certain age, they change. And they start to question their decision about their upbringing and the way they parented, and they start to take on the values of the mainstream, particularly here in England. It's at 14 when kids start to learn GCSEs, if you're at school, and parents become almost different people, feeling when their child's 14 that they have to settle down and do some learning, and they've been playing all their lives, and now they're going to get serious. And you think, no, they're wonderful young people, flexible, confident, well prepared for society. But also, the people at 14 also take on a lot of those. They have pressures from the outside too, so they also succumb to a lot of those pressures. So I began by saying that each of these groups is unique, and therefore the experience of one group necessarily isn't a template for another group. But I think by describing the experience of running a group that's been running for a long time, some general guiding principles can be unearthed, and which could help those who are starting an organization, I hope, and also contribute to debates about different types of organization and different forms of community. And it's having knowledge of some of the underlying principles of how we run will give confidence to those thinking about in another endeavor. And although the Otherwise Club is unique, I hope it's made an important contribution given reality from an alternative vision of discovery and community. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
So there have been a couple of questions. Would you like me to tell them to you?
Okay.
So Frank wanted to know, where do people who participate at the club meet, interact, engage with each other? That is, in which physical locations or internet locations?
We meet in the community centre in South Kilburn, so we're quite central London. It's northwest London, but it's very inner city and quite near Paddington. I don't know if you know London. We're fortunate, we've been there such a long time, we're now the oldest tenant in the building, but although we're actually at the moment trying to save the building from being sold. But we have a lot of space there. We have a room where we can store all kinds of stuff that people give us, toys and crafts and sports equipment and our own history too. I take lots and lots of photographs. And we also have rooms that we can use for more targeted work, like the older guys are doing drama and film studies, and then we have a big hall where people can charge about and do bigger plays, and there's also a big garden as well, so we're really lucky where we are.
Frank wants to know, what do you see as the biggest problem about, in quotes, school, and why?
Well, for me, school is about social indoctrination. It was formed, I very much follow Taylor Gatto's analysis that it was formed alongside the during the Industrial Revolution as a factory mechanism to train people just enough so that they could be semi-skilled workers, but not enough so that they could read anything that might make them think, wait a minute, this is not organized correctly, this society. So it's not really for developing and the flowering of the individual. It's actually there for containing the individual's creativity and making them personally feel that they're not good enough. So I think school actually does very well what it's supposed to do. I mean, people say, well, why aren't they more educated at school? You know, why aren't more kids coming out with a high education? I don't think school is actually there to develop human beings and human potential and creative and resourceful potential. I think it's actually there to damp it down and to make people feel small and that they're not good enough and they're not good at French and they're not good at math. And it's a problem with them, or they can't sit in a chair. I mean, the medicalization of childhood has just extraordinary in the years since mine was small. My children are now grown. I'm just astounded. You know, I'm someone who's prone to exaggeration, and the other day I was talking about, you know, all these kids being medicalized. People were saying, no, it's much worse than you're saying, and I thought I was exaggerating. People are, it's social engineering, and I've just been watching, while I was waiting to come on here, I was watching War on Kids, and they're looking at prisons. I mean, you know, I've always said that school is a prison, but I've thought of it as a fairly gentle prison where, you know, there's some nice things that happen, and there's some good relationships, and there's some playtime, and there's some creativity, particularly at primary school. And to be watching that film and realizing how much violence and positive destruction of children there is. I mean, this zero tolerance is absolutely crazy what's going on in schools. So school used to be able to say, I mean, when my mum was at school, say in the 40s and 50s, that it would prepare you for a job as well. I mean, that's not even true anymore. That the job situation is so dicey for our children now, say, for 10 years hence. Something just pinged. I assume it's okay. So you think okay?
So that was Claude raising a hand. Claude, if you would like to take the microphone, you can.
Sorry, I'm just reading now. Oh, okay. Should I carry on?
I think you, I don't know if you'd actually finished that question. Claude's looking like there's a sound delay there. Did you want to finish that answer? Were you done?
Yeah, I can go on about this for ages. So, you know, I would not send my children to school now in any way. It is really a destructive place and not there. We need to have a debate about the true purposes of school.
So Lisa asked if an American equivalent would be Saturday school. I'm not sure I know what Saturday school is. Do you?
An American equivalent to what?
To the Otherwise Club, I guess.
Oh, no, I don't think so, because we're not a school at all. Nobody has to come. Nobody has to do anything that happens there. What happens there is chosen by the people that come. So if the people that come choose to run around and in a circle screaming, that's what happens. And that happens quite a lot, actually. That's why I chose that example.
Anya wants to know if the club only accepts homeschooling families.
Yes, we do. In order to be a member of the club, you have to have a child of school age out of school. It doesn't mean all your children in your family have to be out of school. But there are so many places for people who go to school to have extra, you know, to have places to hang out, that it's quite important for us to protect this. And it's also important, for example, we don't allow any journalists to come. It's our home, and, you know, people, you can come and think, oh my God, this is craziness going on here. You know, this is chaos. These kids are, you know, just running wild, and the parents are just drinking tea in the corner. And that, it takes a long time, or it depends on you, but it takes some time to get over that vision of what's happening and to see the self-governing that's going on in there, and you have to get to know the people to be able to see that they're self-regulating and self-discovery, that it isn't chaos.
You know,
So we, you know.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to say I've experienced the same thing. I've tried to visit Sudbury Valley School, and they just have stopped allowing visitors to come.
Right. That's interesting. You know, saying that, we have a lot of new families, and some of them don't like it, and they go. But one of the things I meant to mention was that in 2009 there was a government initiative to subject home education to monitoring and state regulation. In England and Wales, parents are responsible for their children's education, not the state. And they can do that at school or otherwise. That's why we're called the Otherwise Club. Funny word. And the primary law wasn't going to be changed, but there was going to be so much laden on top of it that basically this type of education that the club supports would not be available. Because when the local authority come, when you're a home educator, they want to see, you know, school at home. That's how they understand education. And the Otherwise Club, I think, supports a very different view of life, really, for me. It's not just education, as I said. I don't like to use that term. It's the view of life as a discovery, and it's a great place, and there's great stuff to do, and some of it is the sort of stuff that people used to do when they went to school, but a lot of it is not that. And we do a lot more of the what used to be called fun stuff at school, a lot more trips and a lot more visits and theater and all sorts of things that then people are allowed to do anymore at school because of all sorts of reasons. I mean, in the UK, people rarely leave school during the day because it's so difficult now with health and safety issues of the children being safe, and so they don't go out. It's just too difficult, which seems to be crazy. I mean, in London, we've got a city with such fantastic museums and culture and history all everywhere, and lots of it's free, and you could just spend all your time going from one exhibition to another, and yet people in these institutions are not allowed to do that because it might be too dangerous.
Claude, who raised the hand earlier, put a note in the chat asking, do the parents generate a learning proposal in a collaborative way?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood. Do parents learn in a collaborative way?
Do they generate a learning proposal?
I don't know what a learning proposal is. I just think people are discovering life all the time, so that you don't need to make a special mention of it in the sense of a proposal. But what happens is people will sit together and chat of any age, people of any age, and then someone will say, oh, I do this, or my friend does that, or I went to a local museum and there was, you know, a person was doing this and it was really interesting. I'd like to do that. And then those of us who are good at organizing, they'll come and say, you know, could we do that? So then what happens is they write it. They have to go away and find out how much it would cost and if the person is up for it or if they're up for it. And then they write it down on a piece of paper and it goes on the wall. And people sign up. So say, for example, we had a weaver come. And she came for an hour and a half for £30. So we needed 10 people for £3 at a certain time. And if 10 people or more sign up for it, then it will happen. So that's how activities happen. But they can happen much more spontaneously as well. If there's people in the room who have something they do. For example, I was talking about it was a person doing handcrafts, and they just sit there doing it, and then people come over and say, what are you doing, and can I help, and could I do that, and then a bunch of people join in doing that. Some of the people are 40 and some of the people are 5.
I just put a link in the chat to what I think is the website for the Otherwise Club. Is that correct?
I'm just, oh God, if I click on it, am I going to go away?
No. It's the otherwiseclub.org.uk?
Yeah, that's right. It is a very old website, I'm afraid. We're just changing it, but it'll give you some idea.
But there is a paper, your thesis from 2008 on the site, right?
Yes, that's right.
Frank wants to know, sorry?
Somebody asked about if I was education minister.
Right. So Frank said, if you were going to give the Minister of Education one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Well, I've always said it would be stop making education compulsory. So what this would mean, because in England education is not defined as school, there is education otherwise. So, but more than that, this would mean that people could choose what they did with their time. And that would mean that these institutions would have to change a lot in order for people to choose to go there. And they would have to court people and treat them as respectable humans rather than people under 18 being treated very, very badly, in my view. And that the drive to discover something would come from the person doing it, not from above. Because there is no curriculum that anybody would say will get you even a job, never mind a happy life. I mean, in the 40s and 50s, maybe that was true. You could say that if you learn this and if you pass these exams, you can get these jobs. That is no longer true. In fact, we don't even know what the jobs are going to be in 20 years' time. So what I want to see for our people who are younger, under 20, is confident, flexible, self-knowledgeable people who can say, oh, that looks like a little chink of light over there. Now I'm really good at knitting, so maybe I could do something there to get, to find a place for myself in the world. Or I can, a lot of people can develop a new job, or I don't want to live like that anymore. For example, my daughter, who tries to live without money at all, and is independent, it's not a life I would choose, but she lives very differently, and I really respect that and admire her for it. So people are going to have to choose other ways of relating to our society, because things are changing very, very fast. So we can't say that we know that if you learn this curriculum, you will get a job. And as Taylor Gatto said, it really takes very little time to learn basic arithmetic and reading and to read. Most people do that by themselves, given the time and space. And that's basically all you need. Otherwise, you need self-confidence, self-knowledge, and flexibility.
I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. So, Leslie, we have 4 children, one of whom by choice loves the traditional school environment.
Right.
Would you address sort of the differences in personalities of learners, and would you support that choice to choose to go to a regular school?
How old are they?
Well, so this isn't a fair question because there's so much background here, but she's 16, and she just loves everything about regular school. Right.
Well, it's funny, I had a sort of just a slight glimpse of that. And my daughter, when she would say, I don't know what to do, or I'm bored or whatever, I said, well, what do you want to do? And that's a very difficult question. What do you want to do? I mean, most of the time I couldn't answer that. I just feel something's wrong, or I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to do this. So my daughter used to love to do schoolwork in the sense of filling in the blanks. It was like spellings or capitals, or because there was a right answer, and it wasn't what you want to do. And I think it's kind of a rest in some ways to go to school, to have a structure where it says, okay, this time you do this, and at this time you do that. especially if you know that you can leave at any time you like. And going to school, if you know you've got home educating parents, or you know home educators and your parents would support you in that, it's a very different experience from going to school and that's what you have to do, and you have to, and this is your future, and if you don't do right and you don't jump through all the hoops, you're going to fail and you will turn out to be nothing, you know, all that story that goes along with it. So that's one answer. Another answer is, from me, that especially when people are, I don't know, it depends on the person, but I would say under 12, that they can't understand how badly school can affect them. I think one of the few differences between people over about 18, 20 and people under 18, 20 is that they have more of an overview of life. They have more experience, and they could stand back a little bit more, and they can see that if you go through that experience, it can affect you so badly that you will not be able to get over it, in the sense that it goes into your very being. So sometimes, you know, I always say that if my children had asked to go to school, I wouldn't have allowed them, and I say it's not your decision, it's mine, because I think it's a damaging place to go. And I think that it will damage you, and I don't want you to have that experience. But it depends on the age very much, and the relationships, and certainly by 16, I think people are pretty able to decide for themselves, and also to understand all those dangers and to stay away from them, or reject them and just say, well, that's, you know, I know there's another way, so I'm not going to worry about, you know, if I fail an exam, it's not the end of the world, because, or whatever pressure is being put on them. They can defend themselves against it much better.
Are there any structured traditional schools that you feel comfortable with?
If something is compulsory, if you have to go there, I know it sounds extreme, but to me it's a prison. No matter how lovely it is. You know, if you do yoga and meditation and, you know, Steiner schools and so on, if you have to be there, what if you don't want to go? You don't feel like it. No, sorry, you go to school every day, you have to go. I mean, here you get fined £60 a child if you don't go to school, if they're unauthorized absence, it's called. Yeah, this is ridiculous. No. If you have to be there, no. If you don't have to be there, it's a community center. That's why. That's what, you know, I say the club is the community center. It's a place where you can go if you want to, and see what's going on, make things happen to your community. So it would be great if all the schools, if education was not compulsory, we'd have all these wonderful community centers, and I would like to go to some of them and use French again and, you know, brush up on various things and maybe learn carpentry.
It seems like those projects that have a financial outcome or can generate energy behind them are more likely to spread than independent learning centers. I'm trying to imagine how you would create an incentive for that, knowing that the structured organization of other learning environments is much more likely to capture people's attention and energy.
What do you mean by the economic?
Well, so we've been talking over the last couple of days about the ways in which things get done. So if you people do like to gather around projects. They like to work on activities that are structured and organized. And so institutions have an inherent advantage because they end up creating human energy.
Right.
And so the individual decision making and then the creation of individual centers, the way you described, seems like it's an inherent disadvantage.
I see the club as a place where people come together and energy is created. It's just self-created. It's not from on top. So, you know, people come there and things happen. I mean, that sounds vague and silly, but it's true. You know, people talk to each other and say, oh, you know, so for example, you have maybe an eating, not an allergy, but not a, you know, something that you can't eat. So a lot of people nowadays are trying not to eat gluten and wheat and sugar. And then somebody says, oh, I've got a great cake recipe for that. So the next week that cake is made, and then somebody else brings 2 more in next week. And, you know, just from a small discussion or somebody drops a comment, things begin to happen, and then we're thinking about a recipe book, and now there's a cafe going to be opened up, and you know, this small ball has started rolling, and you know, as you say, when people get together, energy starts to happen, but it's from those people involved. Nobody said, now come on guys, we need a project. I want you to think about recipes for people who have you know, problems eating the normal foods from on high. You know, nobody said that, but this happens, and it becomes the ownership of everybody, and everyone is excited about it and pleased about it, and has all different bits and pieces to add to it. And sometimes that goes somewhere quite far. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it falls away, but that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not in any way questioning the value of what's happening, because I'm a huge supporter. But let's just say that somebody says, sure, I want to start a special school system, and they get a politician involved, and then a foundation gets involved and provides money, and then they form a staff, and then they do marketing.
Right.
It feels as though those kinds of institutional behaviors have an inherent advantage in terms of growth, and that you almost have to say, go ahead.
Yeah, to some extent, and they have done more. I think that is becoming history. I think there's more and more happening online, that way of relating. And I see with a lot of young people, you know, between 20 and 30 are coming together in different ways. I mean, that model that you're describing, I think, is becoming outdated. What happens at club really is so precious and vulnerable because it's actually talking about a completely different way of relating together from most of the mainstream society, which is very difficult to maintain, and we're constantly fighting against. I know someone once said to me, why don't we ring a bell? We can all sit down to eat lunch together. And I thought, oh, what a good idea. And then somebody else from the back of the room, an old member, said, never. Goodness, what is she so upset about? And then I thought, oh yeah, that's right, that's a school. Okay, right. I forgot. That's not what we do. Sounded like such a good idea. So what we're really, I mean, to have another otherwise, I mean, not otherwise club in the sense of exactly the same, but to this, what we call in England autonomous education, I think in America it's called more unschooling. To support this, you're really approaching life in a different way, and that's what makes it not replicable or very difficult to replicate. So you're not selling a package that people, you know, that the steps that you described, where you get together and you get a grant, and then you get a building and marketing and so on. That whole process is top down. It doesn't allow for self-development of the people involved. I mean, some of the people involved maybe, but eventually that kind of process leads to a situation where you've got a management team and, you know, so on, so that there's a load of people on the top telling the people at the bottom what to do. I also think money being involved, you know, the fact, I mean, nobody is paid to the club. So there's a lot of volunteers, and although that makes it difficult because people need money, and which is absolutely fine, it makes the relationship to the club different. If you're paid, people then think, well, you're paid to do, you know, you clean up. Why should I clean up? You're getting the money, you know. So it distances the paid person, or it makes the club feel more like a hotel rather than something that I own. And this is a little bit of a problem.
So if you have another question or some other tangent we should be going on, please feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll give you the microphone. I'm particularly interested in this, Leslie, because the traditional school system in the UK would have millions who are involved. You know, what you're doing probably has hundreds, sort of at the most, right? And so what kinds of social movements could we look to that would give us an understanding of how you move from the hundreds to much larger numbers while still retaining the autonomy, and that autonomy which actually in many ways is sort of the a hindrance to the growth because the larger organizational growth can happen much more quickly. Do we have good examples of other autonomous movements that have taken hold?
Well, I'm moving slightly into housing at the moment for all sorts of reasons, and that's a similar problem there. I see. You know, for the co-op movement is a good example actually of a structure that's tried to remain true to its members. So a co-op is made for the benefit of its members. The problem there is it's totally inward-looking and not outward-looking, and that does lead to big problems. But I think I see this as a model, has to be a model of decentralization. So you couldn't have an otherwise, it cannot get too big and still be the same thing. It has to be small enough so that everyone can get to know each other. It's like a village. It's like and that's been actually one of the unseen fantastic consequences for me of being at the club is being able to meet and get along with people that you would never ordinarily have anything to do with if you just stayed in your circles, which most people do. So I think the village is the model. But even more than that, it's a self-defining village. So it's a new type of village. But I think this could easily be replicated in small places elsewhere. And some people are trying to do that in some other movements, like, for example, in England, in the squatting movement, that people are trying to live very egalitarian, and there was in the 60s there were attempts to do that. A lot of them failed for various reasons, but I think they're very interesting to go and look at. All sorts of intentional communities. You know, how much can you dictate these sort of things and say no, we're all going to be equal? Becomes itself sometimes becomes a sort of dictatorship. So I think the fact that we are meeting around a very important emotional issue for most people, which is their children, their family, their life, and the fact that it's a dynamic issue, that it changes. It's not something that's stuck, like meeting around a bridge club, for example, because a bridge, well, more than people, it doesn't change as much as people change. So it's got a dynamism that's constantly changing, and people are having to constantly think about how are we relating to each other, keeps it fresh and therefore live and relevant to the people in it.
Leslie, we have to close. We have sessions starting in a couple of minutes. I'm clapping for you. I've hovered over the smiley face and I go down to the clapping button.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for...
I hope it was okay.
Oh, it was terrific. I'll put the link to the website in again before I leave, but we do need to close the session. I'm going to turn the recording off.
Okay,
thank you,
thank you so much for having me. Thanks for coming.